In this video, we will learn how to use the tools of emotional analysis to help us write our articles better and more critically. The same tools you can use actually in your process of reading. This is a friend of mine. She back then was 12. Her school teacher requested all children in her class to give presentations on a topic which was important to them. So my friend decided to create a story about Mount Vesuvius. So she went on the internet, she collected all the information, which you should do. Before you write about something, one should actually learn about that subject matter. She did it well, she collected all the information, she copied and pasted it appropriately, and put together these 3 paragraphs. She shared it with me. When I looked at it, it seemed kind of like taken from Wikipedia. You know, you've got all the information in it, it's all well put together, but we weren't sure whether it was well designed. So what we decided was to use my tools of emotional analysis and help us analyze the text, and if needed, maybe improve it. So what do we see here? On the left, you've got this chain of circles, and on the right, you have some questions. So let us start with the chain of circles. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 circles, and they represent the process of a story. When we write a story, the story has a beginning, the end, and something in the middle, right? So in the beginning, when you open your mouth to create a story, you do it in such a way to set the focus. You know, yesterday when I wasn't there at home when you rang me, I actually went to the library, right? So you set the focus, you know that time when you rang me, right? So you set the focus. And well-designed story has an ending, and also the ending has to be meaningful. It has to actually say why you told the story, right? So we call it a moral. Every well-designed story has a moral. And there are things in between. I will not talk now about the things in between. We will learn about them as we go through the video. So what are these questions in the middle? The tools of emotional analysis are very simple. For each of those stages of writing, setting focus, disturbance, dialogue, development, resolution, moral, right? For each of those stages, you always ask the same questions. What do you think the reader wanted, what emotion do you think the reader wanted to evoke in you, right? So you, as a reader, you look at someone's text and you ask yourself, what emotion did the reader wanted me to feel? And then you ask yourself questions that help you verify your conclusion. What tools did the author use? What tools? What makes me think that they wanted me to feel this, not something else, right? And another question is, how do you know? And then you think, oh my goodness, I have seen it somewhere else, right? And I have seen it somewhere else, and I have seen it somewhere else. And that's how you know. So it's very simple. We have a single question, which is, what did the author of a particular text want me to feel? What tools do I believe the author used to make me feel this way? And we verify our guesses by checking where else have we seen these tools being used for this effect. Simple? That's it. So now you can go and create your text or analyze some other people's text, because that's all that there is to it. So now we will use these questions and analyze how my friend created her own text and see how these tools help us evaluate her text. So rather than look at the text as it is now and try to work with it, what we will do, we will break it into those 6 stages and see how my friend went in each of the stages of her text. So she began the text. Now keep in mind, this is for 12-year-olds. On the 24th of August, Anno Domini 79, Mount Vesuvius erupted in Pompeii. It erupted with a deadly cloud of volcanic gas, stones, and ash. Right. So now, if we were to ask ourselves about the emotion that my friend wanted you to feel when she actually opens her text with this sentence, what do you feel? Reflect a little bit. What emotions do you think she wanted you to feel now? Clarity about the subject matter, like she needs to start the text. She began explaining, guys, I'll be talking about the Mount Vesuvius and this is when it happened, and now you know, right? So she wanted you to know what she's gonna talk about. But what is the problem right now? This is a presentation. Do you feel invited into this presentation? Do you feel, what would you like to feel when someone opens a presentation? Maybe curious? Maybe what? Have some sense of clarity why she is talking about this particular issue, because you can yourself relate to the problem? Well, we don't really know, in just judging by this sentence, why she selected this particular story about Mount Vesuvius. She just wrote it down, and done. But some things she should actually consider, right? That's what I would suggest. That she's writing for she's gonna present this story to 12-year-olds. So not only she needs to actually make the presentation or begin the presentation in such a way that it actually should give listeners a reason to listen to, right? A reason to listen to. But also she should consider who her audiences are. They're 12-year-olds. So they sit there and she stands up, imagine this, in front of them, and she just recites. On the 24th of August, Anno Domini 79, some mountain somewhere, God knows where, erupted, and it was really, really bad. Like, if she said it, it actually would have been better if she said that it was really bad. But what she didn't actually connect it. She didn't connect with the audience emotionally, didn't give them a reason why she's saying all of that and why the story. So these are the thoughts I want you to hold in your mind when you actually think of starting your own texts or even analyzing other people's texts. Well, let's have a look how we could have done it differently, especially considering that she's talking to 12-year-olds, right? So I'll just copy this thing so we remember that we're talking to 12-year-olds. So this is what we came up with. Somehow this looked really, really like not for a 12-year-old. On the 24th of August, Anno Domini, you can imagine these kids are sitting there in front of her, already tired from hearing this enumeration of these numbers and Anno Domini and 79 and who knows what that means. I was thinking with my friend, how else could you, what emotion do you want to evoke in your audience? Well, how do you want them to feel when you open your story? And I did guide her a little bit, and we came up with this. 2,000 years ago, right? 2,000 years ago, just a little trick. So we didn't change any of the rest of the text. Notice, I let her have her text, but just a little trick of replacing, or not replacing, but rather than starting with the 24th of August, putting this number here. What does it make little 12-year-olds feel? Like, oh my God, she's talking about something that happened really long time ago. Oh my goodness, what could it have been? Right? So there's some curiosity already there. Right? So we have not so much clarity about the subject matter because they're only 12. Make them feel curious, right? You're not curious. Maybe also amazed. Oh my goodness, 2,000 years ago must have been when my mother was born. I mean, you know what I mean, right? It is like incomprehensible for a young man or woman that 2,000 years ago something existed on this planet. How else could we have changed this introduction? This is what we have done actually with my friend. But now, in retrospect, I'm thinking about it, and you are sitting here, and you can think to yourselves, how else could we change it to make it a bit more for a 12-year-old, and also a bit more meaningful for them? So I'm thinking to myself, all right, so every time you have some ideas, by the way, do not just listen to me. Stop the video and think to yourselves, and then go on with the video, right? So I don't have to steal your ideas. But now I am thinking, if I were to do it today, I would say 2,000 years ago, a tragedy struck, right? Now that's powerful. Now people know what to expect. They know where it happened, when it happened 2,000 years ago, and now you have their attention, right? You have their attention. They are all listening. What the heck happened? Right. So when you want to set the focus of your story, you do it in such a way that you know to whom for whom you are writing, and now you will reflect yourself on what kind of an emotion you want to evoke in your readers to get a desired effect in them. Do you want them to be curious so that you can tell them now something new? Do you want to upset them so you can actually show to them what bigger problem there is, right? So Mr. Bumela in your classes will show you where to find lists of emotions. I found this on the internet, on Google. I just typed lists of emotions or list of emotions, and you can see you have angry, depressed, but when you go down, then you have the opposites: open, loving, happy, right? And then sub emotions. Really, really good for your work. It's good to study them before you actually begin writing your text, so you can actually see which words you know, which ones you don't, and you can actually explore their meaning and think to yourselves, well, I wonder how I would begin a text in order to make my listeners or readers to feel in a specific way. Okay, I'll put it down now. So this was one trick here. Well, let's have a look at the next sentence. You can see in this first sentence I left it, and the rest of the text followed. The next stage of a well-designed text is some conflict, some disturbance, right? So you're telling us a story about something. Why are you telling us the story? Well, because something happened, right? Something happened. In this case here, what we have is that the Mount Vesuvius didn't just erupt, it erupted with a deadly cloud of volcanic gas, stones, and ash. A tragedy happened clearly. The word tragedy is not used in my friend's text, but that's the disturbance. Something horrific happened, right? And you can see, even when I talk to you, I can use those words, tragedy or something horrific happened, because I have now broken the text into those stages. The first one, focus, and the other one, disturbance, and they allow me to think of the text with specific questions like, so what happened? Why are you telling us the story, right? So, and I'm telling you this story, for that's what she should have thought. It's because it was horrific. It was, it was a tragedy, right? All of that. It would have been good if these words were used, because that would make more sense to everybody else who is listening, right? Would have made the text more explicit, more interesting, and more clear to the audiences. But as my friend had it in her text, it wasn't really explained, right? On the one hand, she just says, oh, well, this erupted and erupted really with a deadly cloud, and she has here some facts, and that's it. The text is not really having its required impact on the readers or on the listeners. So let's have a look how we could change it now by asking ourselves the same questions. What emotions do we want with this text to evoke in the listeners, right? And what tools will we use? So what could she have done? She could have said, the eruption resulted in tragedy and devastation, right? So 2,000 years ago, Mount Vesuvius erupted, blah, blah. And instead of saying it erupted with a deadly cloud, she could have said, continued with the emotion of what? Well, I'm looking now into that list of emotions I found on Google, and it's helpless note, indifferent note, afraid note. I found this empathetic, right? We want to put the reader somehow in the shoes of the people to whom this tragedy happened, right? So maybe feel empathetic, feel empathy for them. We don't want them to feel, I looked at sad, and sad had devastated, but we don't want the reader to feel devastated, more like empathetic, right? So the eruption of the volcano resulted in tragedy and devastation. So what you're saying is, look, long time ago, something happened, and that something was really a tragedy that resulted in devastation, right? So now you have people's attention, but not only that, you have their feelings, you have their heart, they're with you, they want to know more. So your presentation as a literacy activity is meeting the desired impact, right? People are listening, they're interested. And the only way we did that, we kept the whole text. The only way we did that, we just added a few words to the original presentation, and instantly it changed the impact of the text. Let's have a look at the rest of the text. So here's this text. When we now examined my friend's text, as you can see, I'll just make it more clear for you. So I will just use a little square. There was absolutely nothing in her text that she initially created which we could use for a dialogue, right? So she did set the focus, there was a disturbance, but there was no dialogue. And what is dialogue? you know, when you have a car accident, for example, right? When there's a car accident, so people say normally, oh, you know, on this very day in the evening, a car hit another car and, you know, things happened. And then we asked the witnesses. We spoke to the people who were there in place. We spoke to their families. Actually, even the local city council came and he spoke about the victims in a very favorable way, and that people who died will be a loss to the community, right? So there's this dialogue. People have a dialogue to make sense out of what is happening, right? So you need a dialogue to include voices on the very subject that you are discussing. But there were no voices in my friend's presentation because most of her text that she put together was from Wikipedia and sources like this. And Wikipedia doesn't want you to feel emotions, they just give you facts and we move on. So I asked my friend, what will we put in here? What information can we have from witnesses and from other people? Like, you know, how can we help people bring some extra information from real human beings into our text? And it was interesting, and that's why I'm mentioning it. My friend, my little friend, actually did do some research and did have some opinions and she found some research on the topic and so on, and witnesses. She just didn't know where to put it because she obviously didn't know my tools of analysis. So she herself couldn't solve the problem. So all the research she found on what the eyewitnesses have seen or what research says about the topic, she just threw it away because there was nowhere it applies. But this is the place, right? This is the place. What is it that people say on the subject? So let's have a look what she found. This is what she has. The results of a recent study. Recent study. How interesting, right? Recent. So students are sitting there, her peers, going, oh my goodness, someone recently looked into it. Must be still important, right? So the results of a recent study published in 2010 show that hot surges of lava of at least 250 Celsius degree at a distance of 10 kilometers from the vent were sufficient to cause instant death, even if people were sheltered within buildings. Now, that's a terrible, terrible thing to experience, right? And notice she has here a letter written by an eyewitness. Now, when you sometimes organize your dialogues or information from witnesses or from people or from sources, you need to solve it. What will be first? And it sounded that if the friend of mine wanted to alarm people as to how tragic the event was, the idea of saying recent study, right, was still showing to her peers how painful this event still is and how important therefore it is to know about it. So that, and then in order to review, so here she says, look how horrific it was, and this is why all of this happened, right? Let's read. So here we signal how devastating the eruption was. So this is from a study, and let's listen to this one. A few years later, after the event, right, Pliny the Younger, the only survivor, wrote to his friend, it was not clear from which mountain the cloud was rising. The buildings were now shaking with violent shocks and seemed to be swaying to and fro as if they were torn from their foundations. Then the flames and smell of sulfur, which gave warning of the approaching fire, drove the others to take flight. You could hear the shrieks of women, the wailing of infants, and the shouting of men. Some were calling their parents, others their children or wives, trying to recognize them by their voices. The whole world was dying with me, and I with it. You can see how much her story or her presentation to her peers would have lost had she not included these two voices in her text, right? So when we were analyzing her own text, when we got to the stage of dialogue, and when we found that she had no dialogue, we inserted it, and she already had it handy because she's found it before. And now the story, through those voices, became closer, more important, more relevant to the audience. So once we have reported what people were saying, we move to the next stage, which is the stage of development. So she had that stage well covered, and she describes what actually happened, right? So let me summarize again. We said what happened. We actually set the focus, then explained what the problem was, why we're telling the story, gave the voices, and now we actually describe, right? We're describing a bit more the facts. So all objects, even people, were plastered by the volcanic ash and so on. I didn't suggest for my friend to make any changes here. It was just a description, right? We have done enough of emotional work that I was very happy with the text as she created it. You can yourselves, when you actually write your own text, see how you can actually continue the emotional analysis. Here it was fine. This was just for people to get a bit of a picture, to come to terms emotionally with all the events, what actually happened. So these are just facts. The next one is resolution, right? Resolution is the question, well, so what? So where are we now? Well, where are we now? Pompeii was, this is her text, I didn't change anything. She had it as it is now. Pompeii was rediscovered almost 150 years later by a Spanish engineer, the Alcibiades, in 1748. Since then, it has been a massive tourist attraction. Over 2.5 million visitors visit every year Pompeii, right? And it has been like this for over 250 years. Histories can study how the people lived. Histories or historians? Hey, I think historians. Someone got some things here wrong. Historians can study how the people lived and the quality of the life on that day. The people of Pompeii lived pretty well in the houses and stores. The paintings on the walls are still bright and clear, right? So when the volcano erupted, it just basically created a time capsule from the whole city. And you can see today how things were 2,000 years ago. So it's basically, it was rediscovered. People can see it. Historians can study. And they can study because everything is kept in place. Notice I didn't make any change because after the fact we explained here, resolution, which is so what's happening now. So we went to the moral. Remember, every story has to have a moral. You have to have a conclusion that basically summarizes why did you tell the story? What are the people to learn from it? What did you want them to feel? What did you want the reader to feel? Alert, aware, happy, and so on. Now, you might, let's have a look at my friend's original text. And this is where it ended. So at the end, she just wanted to give some historical facts where geographically the city is located, right? But nothing to it. Notice that my friend finished her text by simply saying, Pompeii is now a tourist attraction. if she really gave her presentation in this very manner, how would you feel as a reader or as a listener? Did she tell it to us so that we can go there for holidays? That's really awkward, right? Like, you are left with no message. So it's very important when you finish the text, you actually think about the moral of the story. Why did you tell the story? What did you want the listener to feel? You wanted to feel alert, aware, happy, cautious, I don't know, whatever, sad. By all means, please have a look at all the emotions, study them, and this helps you to think about your own reasons. Sometimes we do a lot of things and we're not quite aware why we do things. So, thoughtful. Look at this. Amused? Did she want to amuse her peers? Did she want them to make them? Did she want to make them thoughtful? That's more like it, right? Thoughtful. I mean, we just about cried listening to the stories to the story or the description of the eyewitness. So clearly she didn't want to amuse people. She didn't want to make them attentive. She didn't want to make them focus. She wanted them to be thoughtful somehow. But how? Now, I have taught this method to many people, and it's very interesting that when I ask authors about this question as to why did you create this story, why did you want to tell that story or created this text, why did you do that, they find it very difficult to actually articulate. It's the hardest thing, right? It's the hardest thing to articulate the moral of a story. So I had to help my friend a little bit. And I said to her, and it's very interesting that I said half of it, and then she quickly picked on it, and she finished the moral. I said, well, maybe, you want people to be thoughtful, aware of what? Of fragility of life, right? Fragility, because we live our lives, and all of a sudden, all is well, and we have our joys and our arguments, and we take things for granted, and then bang, something happens and it's all gone, right? So there's a fragility to life. There's that fragile dimension of life that we might not see it every day, but when we see it, it really strikes us badly. So I thought maybe we should complete the story with Pompeii as a reminder that we live on a fragile planet, or maybe that that the life is fragile, right? We could have concluded that story differently. And then she said, and we should be aware of it. The way she said it was just fantastic, right? So this is my friend, actually, this is what she added, and I thought that really made the point. So I said, maybe it is a reminder that we live on a fragile planet. And she goes, and we should be aware of it. Now, this is the link to the final video. I could play it for you now, but it makes it really difficult to hear it through this medium. So what I will do, I will put this link for you. I'll leave it on this PowerPoint, and I'll put it on the website, and you can actually go there and listen to it. Now, my friend is 12-year-old. She speaks like almost swallowing half of her words and not pronouncing really well, but she's still a child and not an actor. So do not be worried too much if you can't understand everything she says, but do see the video, and now you can actually appreciate it for what it is, considering how much work has gone into it. So thank you for watching this.